So good evening and welcome. It is 6 p.m. It's Thursday, December 8th, and this is a business session, regular meeting of the Board of Education. So with that, we've called the meeting to order, and Emma, if you'd please call the roll.
Sure. Mr. Bartz?
Here.
Mrs. Fiesel?
Here.
Mr. O'Brien?
I am here.
Mrs. Patrick?
Here.
Mr. King?
Here. So if you'd all please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And we don't have any suggestions of changes,
Nope.
amendments
No,
to the
sir.
agenda, so could we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
And a second?
Blind squirrel. Second.
And any discussion? Please call the roll on the agenda.
Mrs. Fiesel?
Yes.
Mr. Bartz?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mrs. Patrick?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes, so the agenda is approved. We have two presentation items. We're going to leave this room, adjourn from here to the cafeteria of the middle school for student performance. Ms. Amy Ruff, the director of the Liberty Middle School Choir, is going to have her performance for us, and then we will come back for here to the second presentation item and the rest of the agenda. So if you'll please join us.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much for inviting us tonight. We have our Liberty Middle School 8th grade choir here, and my name is Amy Ruff, and I direct these wonderful kids. Many of them have been singing the last 3 years, some of them too, and a couple of them just joined this year, so it's a really treat. But we're going to perform a couple pieces for you to start out with the meeting today. The first one is a song that we did, Star Spangled Banner.
One seems to hear words of good cheer from everywhere, filling the air. Oh, underground, raising the sound, oh, in the town, telling it to hearing every while people sing songs of good cheer. Christmas is here. Ding, 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 dong, ding, 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 dong, ding, dong, ding, ding. All the bells, rings of the bells, all sing and roll. Christmas is here, bringing the cheer to ding, 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 that is the song, ring, ring, ring. One seems to hear words of good cheer from everywhere, filling the air. Oh, underground, raising the sound, oh, in the town, telling it to hearing every while people sing songs of good cheer. Christmas is here. Ding, 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 dong, ding, 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 dong, ding, ding, dong, ding, ding. On the distant dawn, we got an air trouble through every ding, dong, ding, dong.
Everybody. Our second presentation item is Ms. Davis and Mr. Wright will present an update report on the Attendance Boundaries Committee work. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for having us tonight. Since we last updated you, the committee has now met a total of 3 times, and they have 3 more times to meet. They, in their meetings, have reviewed and discussed their conceptual maps for high school and elementary schools boundaries. And I'd like to give them a plug for the great work that they are doing. They are getting homework before each meeting, and they're reading and researching, so they're fully prepared for their discussions and their meetings. Moving on, in January, they will continue to talk about the elementary school boundaries and then add the middle school boundaries, and then they'll take all 3 together and look at the feeder patterns and review all of that. In January, they have 2 meetings where they will be reviewing those boundaries, and they will also be prepping for their 3 forums. The forum dates are January 30th, February 6th, and February 13th. And they are at each of the 3 existing high schools. And at that time, they will be collecting feedback from the community. Just to remind all of us, the information about the work of the committee can be found on the website. You can go to the website and go to top stories and find the Attendance Boundaries Committee link, and that will take you to their page and their information from each of their meetings. As we've gotten into the process, we have received feedback from community members about where they potentially might be. We've received feedback via emails, social media, and coffee chats that Mr. Rafe has held. The comments that we've received in general, and what I shared with the committee last night, are regarding transportation times, concerns related to transportation times and distances, the splitting of the city of Pell, which you may have seen. There was also an article in This Week about that. As you know, in our redistricting guidelines that you've set forth, we recognize that the board believes that the district is more than political, governmental, and geographical boundaries and directional lines on a map. And so when we think about the district being 95 square miles, covering 6 townships, all are parts of 4 cities and 2 counties, 20,000 students, 24 buildings, we know that it's much bigger than any one part of our district. So that's what I've been sharing with our residents who've expressed concern about that. In addition, some parents have shared concerns about their high school students moving during high school and some of their individual unique concerns related to their child. I'd like to note that these concerns are actually nothing different than previous redistricting committees in our history have experienced. In fact, Mr. Rafe and I were reviewing some files from 2002 that had almost verbatim some of the same concerns residents expressed to the administrators at that time. So we know that we've successfully survived some other redistricting efforts with some of those same concerns. And lucky us, we know how to navigate those concerns and be able to address them as we move forward. We'll continue to respond to questions and feedback that we receive and work with the committee to prep for those forums. I'll continue to share my email address to receive any questions and hopefully mitigate some of the rumors that are out there. And I encourage you to, send people our way to answer questions and be able to make sure they understand the process. So that's a recap in a nutshell, and we are open to any questions that you have.
I have a question. How are we handling preschool? Because in the past, we haven't considered preschool. We just fit them in wherever after we redraw the lines. So because we have a larger population this time, are we paying, or I don't want to say not paying attention, but how are the preschool classes being handled?
When we are looking at the enrollment, we are not necessarily counting that in as we look at K through 12, but yet we know that in some buildings we will have preschool classrooms. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, basically we cannot identify addresses the way for preschool students with the same formula that we use to identify where kids are going to be. And the process we're using for our numbers is based more on grade advancement. So we are not specifically planning or accounting for preschool students in the lines that we're drawing currently.
But we know that there will be classroom space needed for those students.
So some of the elementary attendance areas just naturally are more difficult to fill up because of proximity to schools and so on. If multiple schools closer. So they could end up being, we're going to purposely create space for preschool and SLCs in those buildings.
So just like every other year, if you had preschool in one building last year, you may not have it this year and vice versa?
Ideally, we'd like to, because I think we know more about in the low growth areas, I would hope we could stabilize it.
Right.
And hopefully lock it in for maybe a longer period of time and have less, or have more stability for preschool classes.
Are you getting a lot of direct emails, or is it mostly social media that you're hearing from the community?
Yesterday was a big social media day. But
Yep, it
in
was.
general, I am probably receiving 1 or 2 emails a day. And then yesterday, because of the activity on social media, and Mr. Rafe and I received probably a total of 12 emails. So I told the committee last night, you might feel like there's a lot of chatter going on, but when in the big scheme of things, this is the
That is
amount
less
that
than I
we're.
would have anticipated.
Yeah, it's usually just the people who are getting moved that you hear from. And they're the ones who come to the forums, unfortunately. So you want to get everyone's input because even though your child's not moving, they're impacted by the flow of in and out of students. So you'd like everyone's input, not just those who are moving. And you just can't say, don't move my kid. I think it's very helpful if they're providing you input to say, have you thought about this situation?
Yes. And that was suggested on social media
It was.
yesterday.
It was.
Are some of the committee members, have their students been redistricted before, do you know, from a background perspective? Because I know Mr. Rafe's a 7 move and I'm a 6, so my oldest moved six different schools.
I believe, yes. I couldn't tell you the number of committee members off the top of my head, but yes, they have.
From a perspective standpoint.
They have experience personally, and they have experience, a lot of them have participated in the process of being a committee member before, so they have that and personal parent experience too.
I don't know a lot, but I can't think of a student or anybody that I've ever heard of that's been left behind by the process because, and not had a terrific educational and co-curricular experience because they were redistricted. So just, out there for anyone who wants to hear it.
We do have all buildings represented, correct? When
Yes,
think so.
all,
Committee.
all the buildings are represented equally. Mhm.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Of course.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
A couple of items under the board president's report. First of all, of course, a great thank you to Ms. Ruff, the director of the Liberty School Middle School Choir. A wonderful performance of 3 songs this few minutes ago. Does anybody have any comments about that they want to share?
Great. Yeah.
Thumbs it up.
Yeah.
As usual, just another showcase of amazing talent within our school district. Recently, the Ohio School Boards Association had their annual Capital Conference. Our board is a member of the OSBA, and one of the functions of that, along with some really top-notch seminars that deal with a variety of subjects that, of course, all touch education in some manner, they do have their annual business meeting. And I represented the board for that meeting. It's where all the delegates of the member boards vote on a number of things like officers, et cetera. But important for me this evening to mention is the legislative platform that the OSBA adopted by vote of the delegates that afternoon. I thought I would share some really relevant and important ones with you this evening. Not very many. This won't take too long. In their text of their legislative platform, among some quality statements, they'll have statements that they oppose legislation or they are in favor of legislation. One of their comments was public education is responsibility of locally elected boards of education accountable to the local community. Arts and extracurricular activities play an integral role in the education of children. The OSBA opposes legislation that subjects districts to one-size-fits-all approach that fails to recognize unique needs of individual students and unique individual districts. The OSBA supports legislation that holds charter and community schools and their operators to the same compliance and reporting requirements as done for public schools. They supports legislation that eliminates the process of flow-through funding to charter community schools, and the state providing that the state of Ohio should provide base funding directly to charter schools, charter community schools, rather than deducting payments from local school districts funding. An important statement here is exactly the message that we and our peer districts, our alliance group, have been out there with the last couple of years. Public school districts must receive, a statement again from OSBA, public school districts must receive no fewer state funds than the amount received by any non-public school. Again, our message about what we refer to as fair funding. The OSBA supports legislation that grants public schools at least the same per pupil amount as chartered non-public schools. And the OSBA supports legislation that makes the support of public education the state's #1 priority. So we'll watch whether our representatives at the State House, the members of the Ohio Department of Education, the members of the State Board of Education are listening to that legislative platform from OSBA, and if they're in agreement with that platform and the efforts that we and our peer districts have been making. So I thought I would share that. I have nothing else there, so Mark, if you have anything on the superintendent's report, please.
Good, thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. And again, I'll echo Mr. King's sentiment that Liberty Middle School Choir did an outstanding job. Very, very proud of that performance. So, a couple good things coming up. If you want to get out and about, Orange Choir has their Holiday Pops concert on Monday, December 12th. As Ms. Ruff also indicated, that Liberty Middle School will have their choir concert here. And if you're looking for a road trip over the holiday season. The Marching Pioneers will be performing at the Peach Bowl, so I guess it's unfortunate that Ohio State's not there instead of in Arizona, but that would have been...
They're rooting for Washington, I heard.
Oh, they are? There you go.
Instead
Good.
of Alabama.
Yeah. So I just wanted to, I had sent you an update on the construction. Again, there's just a lot going on up on Berlin Station Road. If you get up, have a chance to get up there and see the progress. But walls are up. There's exterior brick, the structural steel in the academic areas or the A and B area there. They're kind of working from the ends and coming in. And it's great news that the project is on schedule. So doing a good job. We have two discussion items for you on this agenda. Mr. Fetty will do the first reading of our annual board policy updates, and then Mr. Gordon will be giving an update on the 5-year capital improvement plan that will start for next year. And then two big ticket agenda items, the purchase of security cameras, which is an upgrade to all of our security system, which is, of course, a number that's in our capital plan. And then the water tap fees for Berlin High School are on the agenda, which is a good sign that progress is being made. We have to have that on this agenda so that they can continue with their functions there in the construction. So, and then our next meeting after the break is Thursday, January 12th. So. And then I also want to make note here publicly, we did have two former employees unfortunately pass. As I had made you aware, Mrs. Martin, who was our assistant superintendent from 2009 to 15, passed away. And Dave Forney was a custodian, actually the head custodian that opened Liberty High, and then was a custodial supervisor for a long period. Unfortunately, had just retired, and he recently passed away. So it was very sad to lose those valued staff members. Any questions?
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Ms. Hatfield, if you have a treasurer's report, please.
Absolutely. We have several items for our action items tonight. We have the approval of the October financials, minutes from the October 27th, November 3rd, and November 10th meeting, approval of amended appropriations and donations to the district. The financial information is a comparison of the October monthly financials to the forecast that we did an update for in October. So the variances are minimal, if any. Appropriation adjustments are primarily adjustments for Ohio Department of Education allocations for the auxiliary services and for federal grants. So those are pretty standard, that we get the carry forward of the previous year funds. If they weren't expended, they carry those forward. So this is allowing us to put those into the budget and use those funds. The donations are from for Arrowhead Elementary. We have Chromebooks from Mr. and Mrs. Highland. From Indian Springs Elementary, their PTO donated author visits and several external drives to their technology. For the athletic boosters at Olentangy Liberty, we have a donation for an assistant ice hockey coach. And we have, for Liberty High School, the class of 2016 donated funds for a sign in front of the high school and for sound systems in the cafeteria. So we appreciate all of those donations and thank all the donors for those items. And that's the last item that I have. Are there any questions?
Mostly just a comment. I don't know if it was today or yesterday that the governor said that we're still working off a shortfall for this next one, which is going to probably have another rolling effect for education because the Medicare tax and revenues are down. So I don't know from our forecasting perspective how we're looking at that. If we're going to look at that, I know the biennial is up this summer. My guess is there's going to be no increase despite the efforts of our legislators, but just another thing to follow.
And they're fighting.
They are
the House
fighting,
and
yes, I
Senate are
read that as
fighting
well.
and dealing with that.
Yes, we've got a little bit of bullies squaring off with each other.
Yep.
We are watching our professional organizations that we have memberships with They're helping us track that legislative process and will continue to provide us with updates. We will continue to monitor that as we move into the budgeting season this January.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess the only thing similar to that is, last time we talked about, building permits and the pace of growth, which obviously affect revenue. Can we start to incorporate into the package what we can in terms of what we can get from the various townships on how permits are going, so we can continue to track that on an actual basis?
Okay. Sure.
Thank you, Emily.
Jeff, does it through facilities,
Do we have any requests for public participation on general comments?
No, we do not.
Okay. With that, we have our two discussion items, and Mr. Fetty, if you would, please, it's a first reading of ongoing board policy updates.
Good evening. I present for first reading the policies that are provided in your support documentation. These will come back for a second reading and approval in January. And I'd like to draw your attention to policy 6700, which is in the support documentation. We will be removing that policy for second reading because of some changes, a court ruling recently made that
we don't have to comply.
potentially undo
Yep.
what the change was doing.
Yep.
Right, so
Right.
part of this Fair Labor Standards Act includes the overtime ruling, and what thresholds are applicable for calculating overtime payments. So that federal court judge blocked the implementation of this piece that is in this policy, so we'll hold the whole policy and continue to monitor the legislative act against it.
And I should also say that the board's policy committee met in November to review all of these.
I would also say that if we're going to pull 6710, that we wouldn't adopt the change to change definition of a meeting. We would stick with the existing definition.
Okay.
Looking at the revised one.
Sorry.
What's it, which,
Oh, 6700. This is in the definition, so page.
In the 1,000 definitions.
It's in the
Yeah,
definitions, not in the actual sections.
okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Jack. And Mr. Gordon, if you would please join us for five-year capital improvement plan update.
Good evening. The report coming around should look similar. We've tried to keep the same format, and this information that you have now was on last year's December of 2015. We gave an update that looked 6 years out. This is an update to that report. Now 2016 has dropped off. As you can see the report on the screen here, we had 2016, and that was what we gave last year. So 16 has dropped off. 2017 is now highlighted in green. The thing I wanted to point out is the 5 years that are now on this report. Some of these numbers have changed as we've reallocated some expenses and projects have moved. But the total number for these 5 columns has remained the same. So we've had to move things around in our budget, but we've stayed within the budget as we've moved forward as a whole. And we've tried to keep the same format as well. When I presented in October the report on what the expenditures were for the summer of 16 or the 16 PI, we've tried to keep the same format for consistency's sake. So that's so as we move to the report you have in your hands here for 2017. Again, the format's the same, the 5 columns. Now we have the 5 years, and we'll continue now reporting 5 years out, the current year and 4 additional years. A few changes or updates on here that you'll see is the SMS air handler as we continue to move towards the possible energy project. We have taken that air handler out and actually moved that money into 2018 from 2019 for some expansion of parking at the bus garages. And we will continue to look at how we do that and the cost of the buses as we move closer to Berlin High School open in 2018. Other changes I've highlighted, we had originally budgeted $180,000 for security cameras, and we decreased that this year with a large purchase that we did in the fall. So we had planned to, and we talked about this in my memo to you when we did the purchase, the handheld bus or handheld radios across the district. We had planned on a 4 or 5 year phase-in. We found if we bought it this year, the district could save $50,000 on that purchase. So we leveraged our PI funds that were available, and were able to save the district money by doing that. And so we've taken those money from future years. You'll see at the bottom of your sheet, it's not on the screen, it's at the bottom of your sheet, that we took $29,000 out of for the handheld digital purchases from 2018 through 2021, advanced that to 2017 to accomplish that. And I've itemized that and noted that change on there for you. We've also added some dollars to exterior finishes with the decrease of asphalt and concrete. And again, it's moving that money to the column where, as buildings continue to age, we're starting to see quite a few windows and things that some of the buildings, Wyandotte Run being the main one that we'll put on next year for some window replacements and things. So we're starting to really get into those as we would expect, and we knew when we were looking at a PI levy. So we've made sure we've tried to have enough funds in there to continue that. And then safety and security, which is where the handheld radios fall into our security for reaching. $10,000 came out of that for the radio purchase for this year. And then the down underneath the subtotal, you see that I've brought forward the $118,000 for that purchase that we did, and itemized at the bottom of your sheet the $29,000 that came from future years. So that just again outlines that. And the last yellow column, you see there's the carryover from 2016 PI. When I gave my update in October, we talked about funds that we were carrying forward and the need to update handicap accessibility at our middle school and high school baseball and softball fields. So we carry that money forward. So I've itemized that as well for you to see that that's coming forward and is in that 2017 PI plan, and will be packaged with our asphalt, big asphalt bid that we do, and we're hoping to get out in February. So those are the major changes. Again, we're trying to keep consistent, and we're staying within the budgets that we had laid out for the 5 years, while looking at our priorities each year to see where our funds could best be used. Are there any questions?
It's an item here called OHS band practice field.
I was going to ask.
Oh, I'm
Parking.
sorry. I
Yeah.
did jump right over that. I apologize.
Yeah,
I missed
I
that
was
one.
gonna ask
I was
that one
jumping
too.
between my sheet and the screen and missed that. Yes, I'm sorry. That's a big one as well. When the tennis courts were put in, we've had two things at Orange that were on our list last year. If we go back, in the wrong direction. If we go back on here, we had increased parking at Orange High School. We've talked about that several times, about the limited space at Orange High School, one of which, in addition to having less athletic fields, we have less parking there. So we've talked about different ways of doing it. So we had on this list last year was maybe asphalting the band practice field, which didn't seem like a great idea, but if push came to shove, we needed to do something. The band could still practice on that, and so we really started looking outside the box of what we could do. And one of the other concerns we've had at Orange, the tennis courts when they were built, we've gone in twice early on, right after Orange was built, and done some work on drainage at those tennis courts. We have not been able to correct the issue where there may be a spring, or it's not flooding. There's just moisture. When the ground's in the spring, there's a lot of that moisture in the ground. It's coming up into the asphalt on the tennis courts. So several times last spring, we could only use 4 of the 8 courts because, again, it wasn't flooded, but there's just moisture for slipping, and for safety concerns, we couldn't use those. So we started thinking out of the box of how can we fix both issues, the parking and looking at the tennis courts. So Orange was up this year for resurfacing, so we had quite a bit of money allocated already to resurface the tennis courts, and we had also set that money aside for parking. So again, the water concern at the tennis courts isn't enough that it's flooding or it's washing out, it's just that moisture that's in the asphalt. So what we looked at is the possibility of could we fit the tennis courts behind Orange Middle School. There's an athletic practice field there that the high schools don't use and the middle schools really don't use. It's a smaller field. Youth leagues use it, youth soccer, sometimes youth lacrosse will go up there. So what we're going to do, and that's a good spot, it's a higher spot in the parking lot, everything kind of runs away from it. We're going to plan is to move the tennis courts there, take the current tennis courts and turn those into parking, which would alleviate the parking concern at Orange. The additional benefit to that is, for any of you that have gone through there, and Mr. Bartsch, you're probably one, and I'm sure Emily, when the practice fields are used for JV soccer or lacrosse, or the youth leagues are using them, people are parking all over that road. It's difficult to get through there. So not only do we fix the student parking during the day, we also provide parking adjacent to those fields that we're forced to use for JV games in the youth league. So it kind of really fixes a lot of concerns that we have, as well as then moves the tennis courts up into what we know has been there for several years and we know is drier ground. Whereas when the site at Orange, everything was leveled out, we put the tennis courts in there. We didn't know what that ground was. It was created, and at Orange Middle School, obviously that's been there now for 15 years or so. So we're fairly confident in what we're getting there. We put drainage in and put the courts up there. In addition, there's a lot of excess parking for tennis courts adjacent to that, to the west of where we're going to place the tennis courts. So it just seems to be the best fit, and it's a field that's small enough that it's little used by our current sports, and it's not really going to impact our already small practice space.
When will that start? When will that be? For next year? Will it be done?
It would not be for the spring. We plan to get it done in the summer.
Okay. So how close will those tennis courts be to the middle school baseball field there on the hill?
Yeah. We just did a quick layout to make sure everything would fit, and it would be between 50 and 100 feet, depending on how far we move to the west with the tennis courts.
Did you know at the middle school field on the west side of that would be the home dugout there, well, home bench. There's no dugout. It's a quagmire when it's wet.
Okay.
So if there's a way to you can look at addressing that, and perhaps that's your opportunity if you're going to put in courts to address the accessibility for handicapped folks or people that need that. You may be able to knock that out in one fell swoop.
Okay.
To deal with that, because I mean, it's not unusual for us when we were watching middle school baseball to be ankle deep in mud if we were anywhere near the bleachers that are behind the home plate.
Okay.
So there is a small drainage issue there. I don't know what it is, but.
Okay, we'll take a look at that for sure.
Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And Emily, do we have any requests for public participation regarding action items?
There is none.
With that, we'll move to the single board action item, and I'll present for consideration here. We need to, for our January 12th organization meeting, establish for the first part of that meeting, when we have our election of officers, President Pro Tem for that meeting. We have a motion, a nomination for that position, please.
I nominate Dave King for the President Pro Tem.
Any other nominations for that point? Let's go ahead and call the roll then, please. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Fiesel,
Yes.
Mr. Bartz,
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Mrs. Patrick,
Yes.
and Mr. King.
Yes, so the assignment of myself as President Pro Tem for the organization meeting passes 5-0. And would you please present the treasure action items?
Yes, I would like to present treasure action items A through D, please.
A motion, please,
So moved.
and a second.
Second.
Any discussion on those? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mrs. Fiesel,
Yes.
Mr. Bartz.
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Mrs. Patrick. Yes. Mr. King.
Yes, so the treasure action items likewise pass 5-0. And Mr. Rafe, superintendent action items, please.
Present superintendent action items A through H for approval.
Motion, please,
So moved.
and a second.
I'll
Second.
Sorry, Kevin.
And any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bartz,
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Mrs. Fiesel,
Yes.
Mrs. Patrick,
Yes.
Mr. King.
Yes, likewise, the superintendent action items passed 5-0. With that, as a reminder, our organization meeting is January 12th. We will adjourn this year, sine die, and with that, have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second.
And any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Beazle?
Yes.
Mrs. Patrick?
Yes.
Mr. Bartz?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
And Mr. King?
Yes, thank you all, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.